a pale mist drifted across the rolling vineyards of Bordeaux as dawn broke over Château Vermeil. The silence was broken only by the distant hum of wine presses, until to a field hand's scream cut through the stillness. Beneath the ancient Merlot vines lay the lifeless body of Laurent Delacroix, France's most celebrated vintner, his once steady hands now stained with his own blood. Whispers spread like wildfire. Murder in a family empire built on secrets. And as the news reached Hercule Poirot aboard a Paris-bound train, he sensed it at once. This was no ordinary crime, but a vintage aged in vengeance. Chapter 1. Death in the Vines. The dawn had only just begun to spill its pale gold across the sweeping vineyards of Bordeaux, when the serenity of Château Vermeil shattered like thin glass. A lingering morning mist hovered over the rows of ancient Merlot vines, stretching endlessly like dark ribbons through the valley. The estate, renowned for producing some of France's most exquisite wines, usually awakened gently. First with the soft rustle of leaves stirred by the Atlantic breeze, then the distant hum of machinery preparing for the day's harvest. But on this morning, there was no gentle easing into life. There was only the sharp, guttural scream of a man discovering something the earth was never meant to hold. Henri Marchand, one of the estate's dependable field hands, had set out early to inspect the vine. The annual harvest was only 2 days away, and each worker moved with a heightened sense of responsibility. Henri had always loved these mornings, quiet, cool, and imbued with the sweet scent of ripening grapes. But as he approached the farthest edge of the North Valley, his boot caught on something lodged between the vines. When he glanced down, the tranquility fled his body in a cold wave. A man lay sprawled near the base of the trellis, his clothes soaked with morning dew and streaked with dirt. Henri knelt instinctively to help him upright, only to realize, by the stiffness of the limbs and the unnatural stillness, that life had already left this body long before the sunrise. The man's face, ashen yet unmistakable, froze Henri's breath in his throat. It was Laurent Delacroix, Master Vintner, owner of Château Vermeil, and the genius behind its award-winning blends. Laurent's left hand was curled into a claw across his chest, as if gripping something that was no longer there. His right arm extended outward awkwardly, fingers touching the base of the vines as though reaching for help in his final moment. The collar of his linen shirt was stained with dried blood, and though the wound was not immediately visible in the dim morning light, there was no doubt this was no accident. His expression told the story vividly, wide-open eyes filled with terror and lips parted slightly, as if he had been attempting to speak when death overtook him. Henri recoiled, stumbling backward, trembling uncontrollably. His scream echoed through the vineyard, drawing birds from the treetops and summoning workers who had barely begun their morning routines. Within minutes, the estate was alive, not with the industry of harvest, but with panic. Claudette Delacroix, Laurent's widow, emerged from the chateau wrapped in a dark robe, her hair hastily pinned, her expression one of irritation at the noise, and then horror as she saw what the workers clustered around. Her face, usually framed with an elegant calm befitting the matriarch of the estate, contorted with disbelief. "Step back," she commanded weakly, though her voice trembled. Let me see him." When she reached her husband's side, her breath caught. For a moment, she stared, unable to process the reality. Then she collapsed to her knees in the damp soil, heedless of the dirt staining her robe. She touched Laurent's cheek with shaking fingers, but the coldness beneath her hand stole whatever hope might have lingered. Tears spilled freely as she bowed her head. "Mon Dieu! Laurent," she whispered, "what has happened to you?" The workers murmured among themselves, but no one dared speak the thought that hung thick in the air. Nobody wanted to be the first to utter the word murder. Claudette looked up suddenly. "Fetch a doctor!" she cried, "and the gendarmerie, quickly!" A flurry of movement erupted, but amid the chaos, something else happened that would later be marked as significant. A young woman stepped slowly through the rows, her face pale and unreadable. She wore a modest cream-coloured dress covered with a light coat, and her auburn hair was tied neatly at her nape. This was Élise Marceau, Laurent's highly regarded protégée, a rising star in the wine world, considered by some to be the future of Château Vermeil. Her eyes flickered over Laurent's body, not with shock, but with a still controlled sorrow. She knelt beside Claudette and placed a hand on her shoulder. "Madame, I am so sorry," Élise said softly. Claudette did not respond. She seemed lost, her grief forming a shell around her senses. But Élise's gaze slid away from the widow, drifting toward Laurent's left hand. Something stirred in her expression. A flicker of recognition, uncertainty, perhaps even fear. But it vanished as quickly as it appeared. The gendarmerie arrived soon after, led by Inspector Jacques Morel, a stout, gruff man with a thick moustache and a reputation for impatience. He observed the body with a complicated frown, then surveyed the surrounding vines. "There is no sign of struggle," he muttered, "no prints besides the workers, and his tools are undisturbed." "Tools?" Élise repeated sharply. Laurent did not work in the fields anymore. He had no reason to be here alone. Inspector Morel turned to her. "Mademoiselle Marceau, yes? You worked closely with Monsieur Delacroix?" The young woman nodded. "Then tell me, did he come here often at this hour?" "No," she said firmly. "Never." Morel scribbled something in his notebook. "And yet here he is." As the inspector ordered the area cordoned off, the tension thickened. Whispers swirled among the workers. Who would do such a thing? Why here, in the vines that Laurent cherished more than anything in the world? But the whispering was soon overshadowed by another arrival, one that would change the course of the investigation entirely. By mid-morning, a sleek black automobile rolled up the gravel drive. Its engine purred like a well-fed cat, and from it emerged a man of immaculate appearance, small in stature, precise in movement, dressed in a tailored grey suit and polished shoes that had not a speck of dust upon them. His moustache, perfectly waxed, curled with meticulous symmetry. His eyes were sharp, dark and full of calculation. Hercule Poirot had arrived. Poirot surveyed the sprawling vineyard with a contemplative expression, before making his way toward the cluster of workers and officials. Inspector Morel stiffened at the sight of him. "Monsieur Poirot," Morel said, clearing his throat, "I was not expecting your presence." "Mais oui," Poirot replied with a polite inclination of his head. "I was already en route to Bordeaux for unrelated matters when I received a most distressing telegram from Madame Delacroix." He glanced around. She feared something, how do you say, sinister. Claudette stepped forward, her eyes weary and swollen. "Monsieur Poirot, thank you for coming. I did not know who else to turn to." Poirot gently took her hands. "Madame, I am at your service, but first you must tell me, why did you fear for your husband's life before even seeing the body?" Claudette hesitated, wiping her eyes. "Because Laurent had been Uneasy for weeks, he said someone was threatening him. A collective gasp rippled through the workers. Morel frowned. Threatening him? Why was this not reported? Because Laurent insisted it was nothing, she replied. He believed the estate was being sabotaged. Barrels tampered with, locks found open, equipment misplaced. But he feared it was someone close to us. Someone he did not want to accuse without proof. Poirot nodded slowly. And did he confide in anyone else? Claudette's gaze drifted toward Elise, who stood a few steps behind, silent but observant. Only to her, Claudette said, his protégée. Elise straightened slightly, her expression unreadable. Madame, I only knew what he confided regarding the wine processes. I had no knowledge of any threats. Poirot approached her gently. Mademoiselle Marceau, you were close to Monsieur Delacroix, no? I respected him, she answered carefully. He was a mentor, nothing more. Poirot studied her with interest. And yet, mademoiselle, the eyes, they do not lie so easily. He turned back to the group. Let us continue. Inspector Morel, motioned toward the body. You may examine him, Monsieur Poirot, though the doctor has not yet arrived. Poirot approached Laurent's body with a solemn expression. He knelt gracefully, his gloved hand hovering just above the dead man's chest. He did not touch anything, but his eyes took in every detail. The posture, the clenched hand, the soils on the clothing, the faint cut near the collarbone, hidden beneath the fabric. Curious, Poirot murmured. Very curious indeed. What do you see? Morel demanded. Poirot gestured lightly. The earth on his palms, it is fresh, damp, but only on one hand. And look, his right arm stretches outward unnaturally, as though reaching for something. A message, perhaps. Morel sniffed. Or he simply fell that way. Non, mon ami, Poirot replied. The great Hercule Poirot does not believe in coincidences so easily. Then his eyes shifted to the vines beside the body. Something glinted faintly beneath a cluster of grapes. Poirot leaned closer. Ah, he whispered. He retrieved a tiny object, a broken piece of glass, no larger than a thumbnail, sharp-edged, with a faint residue of dark liquid clinging to it. The inspector frowned. A shard from a bottle? Possibly, Poirot said, but if so, from a bottle of what? Wine? Poison? Something else entirely? Claudette gasped softly. Elise's lips tightened. Poirot stood. Where is Laurent's cellar key? He always carried it, did he not? Claudette blinked. Yes, it should be on his chain, but... She checked the chain around Laurent's neck. It was broken cleanly. The key was missing. Poirot's eyes darkened. Then we have two mysteries already. The man who dies among his vines, and the key that opens the heart of his estate. Morel grumbled. We need evidence, not poetry. Poirot smiled faintly. You will have both, mon ami. He gestured toward the chateau. But before anything else, I must speak privately with Madame Delacroix. Claudette nodded shakily and led Poirot toward the house. Elise watched them go with an unreadable expression. The workers dispersed slowly, murmuring their theories. And Inspector Morel stood over the body, frustration etched into every line on his face. Inside the chateau, Poirot and Claudette sat in the grand parlour, surrounded by portraits of Delacroix ancestors, stern, proud faces gazing down from gilded frames. A fire crackled faintly in the hearth, unable to warm the cold weight of the morning. Madame, Poirot began gently, you must tell me everything. She inhaled deeply. There were disagreements within the family and outside it. About what? The future of the vineyard. Laurent wanted to change the direction of the estate, modernize it. Some believed he was ruining tradition. Others believed he was hiding something. Poirot's brows lifted. "Hiding what, madame?" She hesitated. "A secret that could destroy Château Vermeil." Poirot leaned forward. "And who else knew of this secret?" Claudette swallowed. 3 people, his brother Marcel, who has always resented him, his protégée Élise, whom he trusted more than anyone, and Henri Beaumont, a rival winemaker with whom Laurent fought bitterly for years. Poirot noted each name carefully. "And now, madame," he said softly, "one of these people may have killed your husband." Claudette closed her eyes, trembling. Poirot stood. "I will find the truth, that I promise you." As he left the parlour, Poirot paused to glance once more toward the vineyards outside. The mist was lifting, revealing the sprawling beauty of Château Vermeil. But beneath its elegance lurked something darker, secrets buried deep within the vines, waiting to be unearthed. Poirot adjusted his cuffs, squared his shoulders, and spoke under his breath. "This case, it will require the finest use of the little grey cells." Outside the sun climbed higher. The harvest approached. And somewhere within the estate, a murderer moved quietly, confident that the truth would remain buried. But Hercule Poirot had already begun to dig. Chapter 2. The Family of Château Vermeil. The heavy wooden door of Château Vermeil creaked shut behind Hercule Poirot as he re-entered the grand hallway, leaving behind the vineyard where Laurent Delacroix had met his grim end. Inside, the air felt different. Still sombre, thick with the metallic scent of fear that often followed sudden death. The morning sunlight, filtering through tall windows framed with burgundy drapes, cast uneven shadows across the polished floors, as though uncertain whether it should fully enter a house touched by tragedy. Poirot took a moment to observe the interior. The chateau was a blend of old-world elegance and modern refinement. Ornate tapestries adorned the high walls, crystal chandeliers dangled above Persian carpets, the faint aroma of oak barrels drifted in from distant cellars. This was a home woven deeply into the history of Bordeaux, a sanctuary of legacy and labour. And yet, beneath its stately grandeur, Poirot sensed an undercurrent of discord. Footsteps echoed down the hallway. A tall man approached, moving with the rigid posture of someone accustomed to authority and expectation. His broad shoulders and angular jaw gave him a severe look, but the deep lines around his eyes suggested years of subtle grievances rather than outward aggression. He paused before Poirot, scrutinizing him carefully. "You must be Hercule Poirot," the man said, his voice deep and measured. Poirot inclined his head. "Oui, monsieur. And you are—" "Marcel Delacroix," he replied, "Laurent's elder brother." Poirot studied Marcel's face with quiet interest. The resemblance to the late Vintner was apparent in the sharp facial structure, though Laurent's features had been softened by charm and warmth, qualities Marcel seemed to lack entirely. "My condolences," Poirot said gently. "This is a great loss." Marcel's jaw tightened. "A loss, yes, and one that will be felt far beyond this estate." He looked away briefly. "But I suppose Madame Delacroix has summoned you for answers." "That is correct." Marcel let out a strained breath. "Then I wish you luck. But if you want answers, you will not find them in the vineyards. You will find them here." He tapped his chest lightly. "In the hearts of this family." Poirot raised an eyebrow. "You imply that the murder, if we call it such, may have roots inside the home?" Marcel hesitated. "I imply nothing, Monsieur Poirot, but you would be unwise to assume Laurent's enemies dwelled only outside our walls." Poirot sensed an unspoken resentment beneath the man's carefully chosen words. "Let us talk more, monsieur," he said. "May we sit?" Marcel nodded and led the detective into the drawing room, a wide chamber with tall windows overlooking the vineyard slopes. The air carried a hint of lavender from a vase of fresh flowers on the mantel. Marcel gestured toward a carved oak chair opposite his own. Before they could begin, the door swung open abruptly. A younger man strode inside, his movements sharp and agitated. He wore a tailored navy suit slightly askew, as if he had dressed in haste. His dark hair was tousled, and his eyes shone with a restless energy that contrasted sharply with Marcel's stoic demeanour. "You didn't tell me we had a visitor," the newcomer snapped, "or that he was that visitor." Poirot folded his hands serenely. "And you are? Étienne de la Croix," he said curtly, "Laurent's son." Poirot stood politely. "Monsieur Étienne, my condolences." Étienne waved a hand dismissively. "Yes, well, condolences don't bring my father back." He dropped into an armchair, slumping in a way that revealed his youth, late 20s perhaps, still grappling with the responsibilities thrust upon him. Marcel shot him a disapproving glance. "Show some respect." "I'm showing as much respect as you are, uncle," Étienne retorted. "At least I'm not pretending none of this concerns me." Marcel stiffened. "It concerns us all." Poirot intervened with a gentle clearing of his throat. "Monsieur, perhaps you would indulge me with a few questions about Laurent." Étienne sighed, rubbing his temples. "Go ahead." Poirot turned to Marcel first. "You are the elder brother. Tell me, how would you describe your relationship with Laurent?" Marcel leaned back slowly. "Complex." He paused, letting the word linger. "Laurent and I disagreed often. On business decisions, on the direction of the estate, on many things." "Did these disagreements ever become personal?" Poirot asked. Marcel's eyes narrowed slightly. "You ask as if you believe one of us could have harmed him." Poirot smiled faintly. "I ask only to understand the family dynamics." Étienne scoffed. "Dynamics! That's one word for it. Try bitter rivalry." Father and Uncle Marcel fought constantly, sometimes over strategy, sometimes over pride. Marcel always believed he should have inherited the estate, that he should have been the one running Château Vermeil. Marcel shot Étienne a sharp glare. "And your father made the decisions he believed were right. That does not mean I wished him dead, boy." Étienne rose slightly in his chair. "Forgive me if I don't take your word as gospel." "Monsieur," Poirot interjected smoothly, "anger will not reveal the truth. Only calm reflection will." He turned back to Marcel. "Is it true you felt the estate should have been yours?" Marcel exhaled slowly. "I will not deny I believed I could manage it better. But Laurent had the vision. He charmed investors, critics, distributors. He had a gift. I had the work ethic. Together, we could have built something perfect." His voice hardened, but he insisted on being the sole decision-maker. Poirot nodded. "I see." Turning to Étienne, he asked, "And you, monsieur, did you have a close relationship with your father?" Étienne hesitated before answering. "We weren't close, no, but we weren't estranged either. He trusted me with certain parts of the business. He just didn't think I was ready to take on more." His jaw tightened. "He kept me at arm's length." Poirot tilted his head. "Why do you believe that was?" A flicker of insecurity crossed the young man's face. "Because I wasn't him, Laurent Delacroix, vineyard genius, master vintner, charismatic leader." His voice carried both admiration and bitterness. "I could never live up to that." Poirot tapped a finger against the arm of his chair. The emotional fractures within the family were becoming clearer. But fractures alone did not equate to murder. "What about threats?" Poirot asked. "Did either of you know of any directed toward Laurent?" Marcel shook his head. Etienne hesitated. I heard something, Etienne admitted reluctantly. A few weeks ago, Father received a letter. I wasn't supposed to see it, but I did. It said something like, "You are running out of time to confess. Before the harvest comes, so will judgment." Poirot's eyebrows lifted. A confession? Of what? Etienne spread his hands helplessly. That's all I know. He burned the letter. Did you ask him? Yes. He said it was nothing, that some unstable fool was trying to frighten him. Poirot steepled his fingers. And did this unstable fool have a name? Father didn't say. Marcel frowned deeply. Why was I not told of this? Etienne shrugged. Perhaps he didn't trust you. Marcel's fist tightened on the armrest, but he said nothing. Poirot made a mental note of the mysterious letter. Threats, burned evidence, a secret meant for confession. These were not the marks of a simple business rivalry. There was something far more personal at play. Before he could ask his next question, the door opened quietly. A young woman stood in the doorway, clutching her hands in front of her. Her timid posture and gentle features stood in stark contrast to the tension in the room. Pardon, monsieur, she said softly. Madame Delacroix asks if Monsieur Poirot might speak with her in the library. Poirot rose immediately. But of course. And you are Isabelle, she replied, the housemaid. Poirot inclined his head gratefully. Merci, Mademoiselle Isabelle. Lead the way. As Poirot followed her through the corridor, he observed her subtle unease. Her steps were light, her movements careful, as though she feared disturbing the heavy sorrow that weighed upon the house. You seem troubled, mademoiselle, Poirot said gently. Did you know Monsieur Delacroix well? Isabelle hesitated. He was a kind man, but lately he was not himself. Poirot's interest sharpened. In what way? She lowered her voice. He was afraid, monsieur. He would lock his study door at night. Sometimes I would find him pacing the halls, muttering to himself. What did he mutter? She swallowed. About the past returning, about mistakes that cannot be erased. Her eyes flickered nervously, and once I heard him say, I should have told her the truth long ago. Poirot paused mid-step. Her? Do you know to whom he referred? No, monsieur, Isabelle whispered, but I think it was not Madame Delacroix. Poirot's mind raced. The secret grew heavier. They reached the library, a large chamber lined floor-to-ceiling with aged books bound in leather. Claudette Delacroix sat at a desk near the window, pale but composed, her fingers wrapped around a porcelain teacup she had barely touched. Merci, Isabelle, she murmured. The maid dipped her head and slipped out silently. Claudette gestured wearily to the chair across from her. Monsieur Poirot, forgive me for calling you again, but there is something more you must know. Poirot sat, folding his hands patiently. Take your time, madame. Claudette stared into her tea as if searching for courage at the bottom of the cup. Laurent had been struggling for months. He believed someone within the family was hiding something from him, something connected to his past. And he feared the past was closing in. Her voice trembled. He said the harvest would bring more than grapes this year. It would bring consequences. Poirot's eyes narrowed. Did he name suspects? No, but he hinted that his brother Marcel might resent him enough to undermine his work, and there were heated arguments between Laurent and Etienne. Even Elise, talented and loyal as she is, became distant lately. Poirot sat back slowly. This secret, this past, do you know anything of it? Claudette clasped her hands tightly. Only that it involved an incident many years ago, before we married, something Laurent never spoke of. Poirot felt the threads tightening around him. A conflict buried in the past, a confession demanded, a threat before harvest, a missing cellar key. "Monsieur Poirot," Claudette whispered, her voice cracking, "promise me you will find the truth." Poirot rose gently, placing a comforting hand over hers. "Madame, I give you my word. Hercule Poirot will uncover everything." As he left the library, Poirot felt the weight of the case settling heavily upon his shoulders. A family of secrets, a brother wounded by pride, a son aching for approval, a protégée with her own shadows, a past shrouded in guilt, and somewhere among them, a murderer. Poirot paused in the hallway and glanced out the window. The vineyards stretched endlessly toward the horizon, beautiful, serene, deceptive. He whispered to himself, "In every family there is a vine that grows twisted. It is time to discover which one." Chapter 3. A cellar full of secrets. The vineyard air grew cooler as afternoon approached, and Hercule Poirot descended the stone steps leading to the famed underground cellars of Château Vintner. A wrought-iron lantern flickered above the entrance, casting wavering shadows that danced across the old limestone walls. As the detective stepped inside, the world shifted from sunlit elegance to a hush of ancient earth, and the scent of oak barrels soaked with decades of aging wine. It was as though he had stepped into the chateau's memory. Here, nothing could be concealed, for the walls themselves had absorbed every whispered argument, every secret meeting, every betrayal. Poirot moved slowly, his patent leather shoes clicking softly on the cold floor. Rows of massive wooden barrels lined the dim corridor, each marked with the vineyard's insignia and vintage year. The soft hum of temperature regulators echoed faintly. A place designed for preservation, not murder. And yet, Poirot felt the atmosphere tense around him, as if the cellars were holding their breath. He reached the heart of the cellar, a domed chamber where the rarest and most valuable wines were kept under lock and key. The master key, the one usually in Laurent Delacroix's possession, was currently sealed in an evidence bag upstairs. The estate's cellar master, Pierre Lambert, waited near a small oak table cluttered with inventory ledgers. Pierre was a stout man with a thick beard and the posture of someone who had spent most of his life bending over casks. His eyes were red-rimmed, whether from grief or fatigue, Poirot could not tell. "Monsieur Poirot," Pierre said, bowing his head, "I did not expect to be questioned here." "It is not questioning, monsieur," Poirot replied gently. "It is observation. A cellar reveals more than people realize." Pierre sniffed, adjusting his apron. Laurent loved this place. He spent more hours here than in his own home. He said the wines spoke to him. Poirot nodded, glancing around. "And what do they say now, monsieur?" Pierre hesitated. "That something is wrong. Something has been wrong for weeks, perhaps months." "Explain," Poirot encouraged. Pierre took a deep breath and gestured toward a smaller side passage. "This way." Poirot followed him into a narrower corridor, lit by faint bulbs. At its end was a locked metal door. Pierre produced a ring of keys and unlocked it, revealing a small private storage room. Inside were 3 wooden crates, 2 open and empty, one still sealed. Poirot eyed them carefully. "These crates, they were tampered with?" "Not tampered," Pierre corrected slowly. "Switched. Someone replaced Laurent's selected vintage barrels with lookalikes. These crates once held his most experimental blends. Years of work." He swallowed. "Now they are gone." Poirot stepped inside, studying the room with sharp eyes. And only Laurent had access? "Laurent, and one other person he trusted. Pierre hesitated. Mademoiselle Élise. Ah, Élise, the protégée. The young enologist whose sudden coldness Claudette had mentioned. Poirot stored the information away. Did Laurent confront anyone about this? He asked. Pierre shook his head. He said he was handling it, but he grew more anxious. He stopped trusting people, even me. He began locking every door himself. Poirot looked at the sealed crate. What is inside this last one? The final batch of his new blend, Pierre said. The one he believed would redefine Bordeaux craftsmanship. Poirot ran a gloved hand along the crate's edge. May we open it? Pierre gulped. I suppose so. It took several minutes to pry open the crate. Inside were 12 bottles arranged in cushioned compartments. Poirot picked one up, examining the dark glass, the elegantly scripted label. Cuvée de minuit, midnight blend. Laurent was proud of this, Pierre murmured, but he never revealed the blend's composition. He said it was his greatest secret. Poirot studied the bottle. A secret blend, a stolen experimental batch. A Vintner terrified of his past catching up to him. The threads were tightening. Footsteps echoed suddenly through the corridor. Poirot turned to see Étienne de Lafleur approaching, his expression taut with irritation. So this is where you ran off to? Étienne snapped. My mother said you wanted to examine the cellars. I didn't think you'd drag Pierre into this. Poirot smiled softly. Ah, but monsieur, the cellars hold much of the estate's history. And history, you see, has a way of influencing the present. Étienne crossed his arms. You think someone came down here to kill my father? Poirot stepped past him, returning to the central chamber. Perhaps not to kill him, but certainly someone came here with intentions that were not pure. Étienne's brow furrowed. You're wasting time. Whoever killed my father did so in the vineyard, not down here. Perhaps, Poirot said, or perhaps the vineyard was only the stage, while the motive was buried much deeper. Étienne shook his head. You're speaking in riddles. Poirot placed a hand lightly on the young man's shoulder. Let me be clearer. Your father feared something from his past. Something connected, I believe, to his work, and to someone he once trusted dearly. Étienne stiffened. You think my father had enemies in his own circle? Poirot didn't answer directly. Instead, he turned to Pierre. Tell me, monsieur, were there any unusual visitors to the cellar lately? Anyone who had no reason to be here? Pierre hesitated. Only, well, Marcel. Poirot's eyebrows lifted. Monsieur Marcel Delacroix visited the private cellar. Yes, twice. He said he wanted to check inventory for the upcoming wine exposition, but he never cared about that before. Poirot murmured thoughtfully. Curious indeed. Étienne exhaled sharply. Always back to Uncle Marcel, isn't it? Poirot faced him calmly. Not always. But you must admit, monsieur, that your uncle and father shared a complicated relationship. That doesn't make him a murderer, Étienne muttered. No, Poirot agreed. It does not, but it does make him worthy of attention. Before Étienne could respond, a faint metallic sound echoed from the far end of the cellar, like a door latch shifting. Poirot turned sharply. Pierre paled. No one else should be down here, he whispered. Poirot raised a hand for silence. The three men stood motionless, listening. The sound came again, a soft shuffle, followed by the dim outline of a figure moving through a side corridor. Poirot stepped forward. Bonjour, he called. The figure froze, then bolted. Pierre gasped. Étienne swore. Poirot darted forward, his steps quick but careful, as the shadowy form disappeared into the maze of barrels. He followed the faint echo of fleeing footsteps until reaching a junction of 3 passages. There, the footsteps vanished entirely into the thick silence. Poirot stopped, breathing steadily. "A ghost, perhaps," he murmured, "or someone who knows these cellars far too well." Etienne approached behind him. "Who was it?" Poirot's eyes narrowed. "Someone who did not wish to be seen." Pierre clutched his chest anxiously. "There are only a few people who know this place like I do. Only a few who could move so quickly." Poirot turned, his face calm, but his little grey cells humming. "Then, monsieur, we must find out which of them had something to hide." As they climbed back toward the surface, Poirot glanced once more into the darkness below. He had not seen the face of the intruder, but he had felt something unmistakable. Fear. Not fear of discovery, but fear of what might be uncovered. And in the world of secrets, fear was a most illuminating clue. Chapter 4. The Widow's Bitter Toast. The dining hall of Château Vermeil glowed with the soft amber of candlelight, its high-arched ceiling painted with scenes of Bacchus and his revellers. Despite the grandeur, a cold stillness clung to the room, a void shaped by the absence of Laurent Delacroix. As Hercule Poirot entered, his polished shoes clicking lightly on the marble floor, the assembled family rose in stiff acknowledgement. At the centre of the long oak table sat Isabelle Delacroix, Laurent's widow. Veiled in black lace, though her chin remained defiantly raised. Her eyes, swollen from tears yet hardened by something darker, flicked toward Poirot with the chilling composure of a woman who had rehearsed her grief. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, voice smooth as aged burgundy, "I understand you wish to speak before dinner, but I should warn you, this family has suffered enough interrogation." Poirot bowed. "Madame, I wish only to understand what wounds your family now endures. The truth, she must be coaxed gently, like a shy bird." A sharp breath escaped from Émile, Laurent's brother seated 2 chairs away. "Truth, try scandal. The entire region whispers already." His fingers tightened around his wineglass, knuckles paling. Poirot observed silently. Émile had been restless since his arrival, protective of the family name, but strangely eager to control every conversation. Servants glided through the hall, filling crystal goblets with the estate's prized vintage Cuvée Royale. As the liquid settled, Isabelle lifted her glass with a trembling hand. "To Laurent," she murmured, "may his soul find peace, and may those who wronged him be cursed with eternal bitterness." The toast hung in the air like smoke. Poirot noted how each family member reacted. Émile stiffened, avoiding eye contact. Juliette, Laurent, and Isabelle's daughter swallowed hard and blinked away tears. Henri, the estate manager, lowered his gaze immediately, and Camille, the ambitious cousin and junior winemaker, clenched her jaw as though swallowing a retort. The dynamics were shifting, brittle. Poirot leaned back slightly, allowing silence to stretch before breaking it with a calm, precise query. "Madame Delacroix, may I ask, you knew your husband better than anyone. Did he receive threats? Was he troubled, perhaps, in recent weeks?" Isabelle's lips tightened. "Laurent was under pressure, yes. Business rivals, court disputes, jealous growers, success invites enemies. But none would dare lay a hand on him." Her eyes sharpened. "And certainly no one under my roof." Poirot responded with a thoughtful hum. "Sometimes, madame, the enemy he is not far. He may even dine beside us." A noticeable shiver passed through Juliette, who finally spoke, voice trembling. "Monsieur Poirot, you must not think this family capable of such horror. Father, he was difficult, yes. Demanding, but murder?" She shook her head. as though the word tasted bitter. Isabel's gaze flicked sharply toward her daughter. "Juliet, enough! You forget yourself." But Poirot had seen more than a simple rebuke. Isabel's fingers tightened around her goblet whenever Juliet opened her mouth. Fear of what the girl might reveal? Or of losing control over the narrative? Dinner plates clattered softly as servants began the meal, but no one seemed hungry. Poirot's attention shifted toward Émile, who had drained half his glass with a single swallow. "Monsieur Émile," Poirot said gently, "you seem, how do you say, strained. The death of your brother troubles you deeply." Émile's laugh was mirthless. "Of course it troubles me. He was family. And now the vineyards must answer to auditors, investors, journalists, vultures picking at his bones." His eyes darted toward Isabel. "And some here wish to appear more saintly than they are." Isabel's eyes flashed with fury, but she said nothing. Her silence was more telling than a shout. Camille cleared her throat, attempting diplomacy. "Monsieur Poirot, if I may." The estate was already under stress before Laurent's death. She shot Émile a warning glance. "Internal disagreements, creative disputes, harvest delays. It's been a difficult season." "Disagreements," Poirot repeated gently. "A very useful word. It covers many sins." Henri, the quiet estate manager, looked up suddenly. "Monsieur Poirot." Laurent was planning changes to the vineyard. Drastic ones. Cutting old contracts, modernizing production, restructuring inheritance rights. Many people were upset. "But that does not mean—" "No," Poirot interrupted softly. "It does not mean they kill. But the motives, they begin to reveal themselves like the opening of a bouquet." A tense stillness settled. The only sound was the gentle clinking of cutlery against porcelain. Poirot stood slowly. "Forgive me. I wish to see the wine cellar if it is possible. The place where the life's work of Monsieur Delacroix is kept. It may tell me something." Isabel's expression flickered. Fear, hesitation, before she nodded. "Very well. Henri, show him. But after this, Poirot, I ask you to let us grieve." Henri led Poirot through a narrow stone corridor, lit by wall sconces. As they descended a spiraling staircase into the cool, musky cellar, Poirot sensed unease in the estate manager's steps. Rows of barrels stretched into the shadows, some marked with chalk, others sealed with wax. Henri gestured nervously. "This is the old cellar. Laurent's private blend room is locked." "And the key?" Poirot asked. Henri swallowed. "With Isabelle?" Poirot ran a gloved finger along a barrel's rim. "Dust. Unusual. This cellar should be immaculate." "Tell me, Henri, why does Madame hesitate to allow entry?" Henri hesitated. Monsieur Delacroix kept records, tasting notes, harvest logs, financial statements in the blend room. Some of them implicate family decisions, nothing criminal, he added quickly, just private. Poirot's eyebrows lifted. "Ah, secrets, Monsieur Henri, do not remain gentle pets. They grow into wild creatures." Henri looked away, as if wishing to melt into the stone walls. "If you open that room, Monsieur Poirot, you may find more than you expect." Poirot smiled faintly. "That, mon ami, is what I count on." When they returned to the dining hall, dessert sat untouched. Isabelle stood at the window, staring out at the moonlit vineyard. Her silhouette, a rigid, unyielding figure. She turned as Poirot entered, her voice low but steady. "You pry into corners best left undisturbed." Poirot approached her with an air of gentle authority. "Madame, your husband is dead. Someone wishes to hide why. And until I uncover the truth, even the finest wine in this chateau will taste of lies." Isabel's breath trembled, revealing the first crack in her porcelain poise. "And what do you imagine you've found?" Poirot leaned in slightly. "A tension in this family thicker than the oak of your barrels. A truth you fear, and," his eyes glinted, "something hidden in that locked blend room." Isabel froze. Just a moment. Barely a flicker, but it was enough. Poirot stepped back, offering a graceful bow. "Merci, madame. You have been most enlightening." As he exited, the candles flickered violently, though no breeze stirred the air. Somewhere deep within Château Vermeil, a door creaked softly, closing, or perhaps opening. Poirot paused. "Ah," he murmured, "the story she begins to ferment." Chapter 5. The Rival Winemaker. The morning sun spilled across the gravel courtyard of Château Vermeil, turning the dew on the vines into glittering beads of gold. Yet the vineyard workers moved with a heaviness that mirrored the tension gripping the estate. Hercule Poirot stood near the wrought-iron gate, his gloved hands clasped behind his back, waiting for the arrival of the man whose name had been whispered like poison since Laurent's death, Victor Marceau, owner of the neighboring domain Marceau, and Laurent's fiercest rival. Their feud was legendary, a rivalry that had shaped the Bordeaux wine market for nearly 2 decades. And now, as Victor's sleek black motorcar approached, Poirot felt a shift in the air, like storm clouds gathering over ripe fruit. Victor stepped out with a dramatic sweep of his coat, tall and impeccably dressed, with streaks of silver in his dark hair, and eyes that carried both arrogance and intelligence. "Monsieur Poirot," he greeted, voice polished like his imported shoes. "I assume this summons is not social?" Poirot offered a mild smile. "I fear not, Monsieur Marceau, but your presence, it is most valuable. You were, after all, the last outsider to see Monsieur Laurent alive." Victor arched an eyebrow. "So the gossip says. May I remind you, Poirot, rivalry is not murder?" "Non," Poirot replied, "but it does create passion, and passion sometimes can become vinegar." As they walked toward the tasting pavilion overlooking endless rows of vines, Victor's gaze lingered on the chateau with a mixture of envy and bitterness. "Laurent built an empire on charm and deception," he muttered. "The man thrived on secrets." Poirot's ears sharpened. "Secrets? You speak as though you knew them." Victor hesitated before answering. "Laurent accused me, publicly, of sabotaging his barrels last spring. A ridiculous claim, but it cost me investors. I confronted him 2 weeks ago to demand an apology." "And did he apologize?" Victor let out a short, humorless laugh. "Laurent Delacroix. Admit fault? No. Instead, he threatened to ruin me further. Said he had documents proving I bribed distributors. Lies, of course, but he was capable of making such beliefs seem true." His eyes hardened like stone. "If you ask whether I hated him, Poirot, yes, but hate is not a dagger." Poirot studied him closely. The anger was real, but beneath it lay something softer, regret, fear, perhaps even sorrow. "Hatred, monsieur, does not interest me nearly as much as opportunity. Where were you on the night Laurent died?" "In my tasting room," Victor replied instantly. "With witnesses. We were evaluating the new Cabernet release. You may speak to my staff." Poirot nodded, but noted the speed of the answer. Too quick, too practiced, a man prepared for suspicion. They reached a stone terrace where the estate workers were sorting grapes. Victor paused, watching them with a flicker of disdain. "You know, Poirot," he said quietly, "Laurent never deserved Château Vermeil. It should have passed to Émile, the older brother. But their father chose Laurent, the visionary. Émile never forgave him. Perhaps you should ask yourself whom the inheritance truly benefits." Poirot had indeed wondered. but Victor's tone suggested he was not merely offering speculation, he was planting a seed, a redirection. Poirot filed the observation away. Inside the pavilion, Juliette Delacroix waited uneasily. Her hands were folded tightly in her lap, knuckles white. She looked up as the two men entered, eyes flicking nervously toward Victor. "Monsieur Marceau, I didn't expect to see you here." Victor inclined his head, polite but distant. "Mademoiselle Delacroix." Poirot watched the exchange. Juliette's expression held a complexity: fear, resentment, perhaps guilt. "Mademoiselle," Poirot said gently, "you knew Victor Marceau had argued with your father." A shadow crossed her face. "Yes, father mentioned it, but he was angry with many people." Victor's jaw clenched. "Your father accused me unfairly, Juliette. I only sought to defend my reputation." Poirot stepped between them subtly, his voice calm. "Let us not escalate old quarrels. Instead, let us illuminate them. Mademoiselle Juliette, did your father leave the estate that evening?" She hesitated. "He said he needed fresh air. He often walked among the vines to think. I heard him arguing with someone outside, but I couldn't make out the voice." Poirot felt the vines of truth twist tighter. "A man or a woman?" Juliette looked conflicted. I think it was a man, but I cannot be certain." Victor exhaled sharply. "You see, Poirot, even grief clouds the senses." Poirot turned to Victor. "Monsieur, did you visit the estate that night?" A silence thicker than oak-aged tannins filled the space. Victor's eyes flickered. Just a fraction. Poirot saw it. "No," Victor said firmly. "My quarrel with Laurent was loud, yes, public, yes, but I did not trespass onto his land." Poirot nodded slowly. "Very well, then let us explore another question. Why did Laurent believe you capable of sabotage? Was there truth in his fear?" Victor stiffened. "I have competitors, Poirot, not victims. Laurent saw betrayal everywhere. He had become paranoid." He paused, then added under his breath, "Or perhaps someone wished him to be." Poirot felt the shift again. A truth trying to push its way into the light, but blocked by pride, loyalty, or fear. As Victor prepared to leave, he leaned close to Poirot. "If you want the truth, search the cellar ledger. Laurent kept notes on every barrel, every transaction. Someone tampered with them recently. Someone inside his home." Poirot's brows rose. "And how do you know this?" Victor's lips twisted into a bitter smile. "Because Laurent showed me, the day before he died. He wanted my help exposing the fraud." "Fraud?" Poirot whispered. Victor nodded. "Yes, a financial betrayal. One that could crumble the Delacroix legacy." Poirot's little grey cells surged alive. "And who," he asked softly, "would benefit the most from such a collapse?" Victor didn't answer. He simply adjusted his coat and stepped toward his waiting car. "Find the ledger," he said, "then you will understand." The motor car roared away, leaving a trail of dust curling into the morning sun. Poirot stood alone on the terrace, the puzzle unfolding piece by piece. A rival with motive, yes, revenge, financial ruin, humiliation. But also a man who hinted at a deeper conspiracy, one rooted not in rivalry, but in betrayal from within. Poirot turned back toward the chateau, eyes narrowing. The vineyard stretched before him, but the truth, he knew, lay hidden in its shadows. Chapter 6. The Barrel Room Confession. The afternoon light slanted through the narrow windows of the chateau, casting long, heavy shadows across the stone floors, as Hercule Poirot descended once more into the heart of Château Vermeil, the barrel room. The air was cool and thick with the scent of oak, aged wine, and something else. a tension lingering like an unfinished note in a symphony. Henri, the estate manager, walked ahead of him with uneasy steps, carrying an oil lantern that bobbed slightly with each movement. The barrels, stacked in perfect rows, seemed to watch them, silent witnesses to secrets steeped in time. Poirot paced slowly, fingertips brushing the dusted surfaces of the casks. "Mon ami," he began in a low voice, "the more I learn of your late master, the more I see a man pressed from all sides like the grape beneath the press. Financial troubles, family descent, rivalry, and now fraud." Henri nearly tripped at the word. "Fraud? Who told you? A little bird," Poirot replied gently. "A bird that sings only when pressed with the truth." He leaned closer. "You know of this fraud, n'est-ce pas?" Henri swallowed hard. His lantern trembled, casting jittery shadows across the barrels. Yes, I know. But it wasn't me, Monsieur Poirot. I swear on the vineyard itself, I never touched the books." Poirot tilted his head. "Then tell me, if you would be so kind, who did?" For a long moment, Henri stared at the floor, his breath shallow. Finally, he spoke. "Laurent discovered discrepancies in the financial ledgers 6 weeks ago. Large sums diverted from the estate accounts. He was furious, more furious than I'd ever seen him. He suspected someone close to him, someone with access to the blendroom records." "Isabelle?" Poirot asked softly. Henri's eyes widened. "Non, monsieur. Madame Delacroix may be many things, but she is not a thief." His voice dropped. Laurent suspected Émile. Poirot's gaze sharpened. The elder brother. Yes. Émile had been struggling for years. Debts, failed ventures, gambling rumours. Laurent used to bail him out. But when Laurent refused again, Émile was desperate. Henri exhaled shakily. Laurent planned to confront him the night before the harvest festival. I overheard them arguing near the vineyard gate. Poirot absorbed this quietly. And what was the outcome of that confrontation? Henri shook his head. "I don't know. Émile stormed away. Laurent returned to the blendroom and locked the door. He stayed there until late." He hesitated, then added, voice barely a whisper, "When he came out, he looked frightened." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "Frightened? Of what?" Henri's gaze darted toward the darkest corner of the room. He said someone had followed him into the cellar. Someone who shouldn't have been there. Poirot stepped toward him. "Who, Henri? Who did he see?" "I don't know." Henri's voice cracked. He refused to say. Only that he needed to settle matters before the harvest, and then he died. Poirot began to pace the length of the room, his polished shoes clicking softly. The barrels lined the walls like silent guardians of truths long sealed. He stopped suddenly and pointed. "To the far wall. What is behind that door?" Henri froze. "The old tasting room, monsieur. It's rarely used." "Open it." Henri hesitated. Poirot's stare left no room for excuses. With trembling hands, Henri drew out a key and unlocked the heavy oak door. It groaned open, revealing a dim chamber filled with dusty bottles, scattered papers, and an overturned chair. Poirot's eyes glittered. "Ah, something happened here." Henri's voice quivered. I cleaned as little as possible after Laurent's death. I feared the police would inspect it." Poirot knelt beside the overturned chair. Scratches on the floor. A broken wine glass. A smear of red, not wine, but the rusty brown of dried blood. "You see, Henri," Poirot murmured, "this is what we call in my profession the scene of a struggle." Henri clasped his hands together. "Monsieur Poirot, you must believe me. Whatever happened here, I was not involved." Poirot stood slowly, and walked to the scattered papers. Among them lay a torn page from the cellar ledger, numbers slashed violently with ink, and a single phrase scribbled in Laurent's handwriting: "Not safe, betrayal inside the house." Poirot gently lifted it with a handkerchief. "This is most illuminating." Henri's breathing quickened. "Monsieur, there is something else." Poirot turned. "Yes?" Henri pointed toward the shelf. "That bottle. It wasn't here before Laurent's death." Poirot removed the dusty bottle. Its seal was broken. He uncorked it carefully and sniffed. A faint metallic scent. Poison. A rare, slow-acting toxin. Mon Dieu! Henri stepped back. He was poisoned. Poirot replaced the cork with deliberate precision. "It appears so. The blow to the head found in the vineyard was real, yes, but perhaps staged. The true cause of death may lie in this bottle." Henri covered his mouth. "But who would—" Poirot held up a finger. "Ask instead, who had access to Laurent's private tasting room? Who knew he tasted alone late at night? Who could enter unseen?" Henri's eyes filled with dread. "Isabelle." Poirot did not confirm. He simply said, "We must not jump like the frightened rabbit. Instead, we use the little grey cells." He walked back toward the door. "This room tells us Laurent feared someone inside his home. Someone with knowledge of wine, access to poison, and the confidence to enter his private sanctum." Henri whispered, "Madame Delacroix has knowledge, but so does Camille, and Emile, and Juliette." Poirot paused. "Oui, each has motive, each has means." His gaze hardened, but only one had the opportunity on that night. As they ascended from the cellar, a soft creak echoed behind them, as though something had shifted in the darkness. Poirot turned sharply, but the room was still. Still, but not silent, not harmless. Poirot murmured, "The truth! She is fermenting. Soon she will burst from her. The barrel." Chapter 7. Notes of Poison and Betrayal. The evening sky over Château Vermeil glowed with muted shades of rose and indigo, as Hercule Poirot returned to the manor house, the cool wind carrying the faint scent of crushed grapes. The vineyard was settling into a restless quiet, the kind that falls not from peace, but from suspicion thickening like the oils on an aged canvas. Poirot walked slowly toward the veranda, his mind arranging clues with precision, like a winemaker blending the perfect vintage. Poison! A secret tasting room! A ledger page warning of betrayal within the household. And a family web more tangled than any vine he had ever seen. Inside, the aroma of simmering stew filled the hallways, though no one seemed hungry. Isabelle Delacroix stood at the centre of the drawing room, her silhouette framed by the crackling fireplace. She looked pale, weary, and older than she had the day before. A woman pressed under the weight of something unspoken. When she saw Poirot, her expression tightened, not with fear, but with resignation. "Monsieur Poirot," she said softly, "Henri told me you were in the cellar." Poirot nodded. "Oui, madame. And I discovered many interesting things, including a bottle from your husband's private shelf." Her fingers froze around the embroidered handkerchief she was clutching. "His private shelf. I never went near it." "Most curious," Poirot murmured, "for the bottle was opened, and inside, something decidedly not of the grape." Isabelle swallowed hard. "Are you accusing me, monsieur?" Poirot stepped closer, his voice gentle but unyielding. "I accuse no one, madame. I merely observe, and I observe that the poison used, it is rare, not easily obtained. But someone with knowledge of herbs, someone who perhaps tends to the gardens, would know of such things." A flicker of alarm crossed her face. "You think I—" Poirot raised a hand. "Perhaps not you. Perhaps another. Camille, for instance." Isabelle exhaled shakily. Camille adored Laurent. She would never harm him. Adoration, Poirot replied calmly, is a most dangerous wine. It can ferment into jealousy, bitterness, or fear. Before Isabelle could respond, Juliet entered the room like a sudden storm. Cheeks flushed, eyes bright with panic. Poirot, you must come, now. Poirot followed without question. Juliet led him to the conservatory, where glass panes shimmered under the moonlight. At its centre stood Camille, trembling, hands clasped behind her back. She looked as though she had been crying for hours. At her feet lay a small satchel spilled open. Inside, packets of dried herbs and a small brass vial. Isabelle gasped. "Camille, what is this?" Camille shook her head frantically. "It is not what it looks like." Poirot knelt and inspected the items. The herbs were medicinal, common enough, but the vial? It bore a faint metallic residue, strikingly similar to the scent from the poisoned bottle in the cellar. "Ah," Poirot whispered, "Mademoiselle Camille, you have some explaining to do." Camille collapsed to her knees. "No, please, you must understand. I only kept these because Laurent asked me to." Juliet frowned. "My father asked you to keep poison." Camille's eyes filled with tears. Not poison, medicine, for his heart. He had been feeling weak for months. He didn't want anyone to know, not even the family. He said it would cause panic, jeopardize the harvest, the business. Poirot's gaze sharpened. And the vial. "It belonged to him," Camille whispered. "He used it to measure the tinctures. I kept it hidden so the others wouldn't find out he was ill." Poirot studied her. She was frightened, yes, but her panic carried the ring of truth. Still, he could not ignore the evidence. "Mademoiselle, your items were left in plain sight. Why?" Camille looked away. "Because someone searched my room." Juliet stiffened. "What? Who?" Camille wiped her eyes. "I don't know, but everything was overturned when I returned this evening. Someone wanted these herbs found." Poirot's gaze drifted upward. Another red herring, or another player revealing themselves. He stood, mind swirling with possibilities. "Tell me, Camille, where were you on the night Laurent died?" She hesitated, then answered, voice cracking. "I was in the blend room. He asked me to bring him his evening tonic, but when I arrived, the door was locked. I knocked, but he didn't answer. I assumed he had gone walking, so I left the tonic at the door and returned to my quarters." Poirot's mind sparked. Henri had said Laurent locked himself inside. Camille claimed she arrived later. And Laurent had feared someone followed him into the cellar. Poirot walked slowly to the glass windows, hands clasped behind him. "Tell me, Juliet, does anyone else have access to this conservatory?" Juliet blinked. "Everyone in the household. Why?" Poirot turned, eyes gleaming. "Because the footprints in the dust. See there, by the far door. They are fresh. Someone watched Camille here, and left quickly." Isabelle looked pale. "Who?" Poirot's eyes narrowed toward the darkened hallway beyond the glass. "Someone who wants suspicion to fall upon Camille. Someone who knows of Laurent's illness. Someone who benefits from removing blame from themselves." Footsteps echoed faintly from upstairs. Poirot straightened, his little grey cells sparking with clarity. "The net tightens, and very soon the spider will reveal himself." Juliet shivered. "Poirot, who do you suspect?" Poirot looked up the stairs toward the shadowed landing. "I suspect," he said softly, "that the murderer is becoming nervous." He stepped forward. "And when a murderer is nervous, mon ami, they make mistakes." Chapter 8. Shadows beneath the harvest moon. The next evening arrived, draped in a velvet dusk, the harvest moon rising large and golden above the endless vineyards of Bordeaux. Hercule Poirot stood on the terrace of Château Saint-Clair, gazing across the shimmering rows of grapes that swayed like dark waves under the night breeze. The estate was quieter than usual. An unnerving stillness had settled after the coroner's updated report suggested that Bernard Delacroix's death did not happen instantly. He had suffered, slowly, painfully. Someone had watched him die, and someone had let him die. Poirot felt the truth tightening around the suspects like a closing fist. Inside, the chateau glowed gently with lamplight, as guests and workers retreated to their rooms much earlier than usual. The tension of the investigation had spread through the estate like a chill, and even the servants dropped their voices to whispers when Poirot passed. Tonight, however, he required calm. He required stillness. And most importantly, he required the courage to confront the shadows that lingered not in the vineyards, but in the hearts of his suspects. As he stepped back inside, Inspector Renault approached with hurried steps. "Poirot! I've gathered what you asked for, the correspondence between Bernard and his brother Laurent, and, mon ami, you must see this." His tone carried weight, and Poirot followed him into the study, where Renault placed a stack of envelopes on the desk. Poirot handled them delicately, as if they might bruise under the pressure of his fingers. The letters revealed a troubling pattern. Laurent pleading repeatedly for financial help, Bernard refusing with increasingly sharp language, and each exchange harsher than the last. The final note, dated 2 days before Bernard's death, was a threat thinly veiled in concern. "If you will not support me, brother, then circumstances will force my hand. Do not blame me for what must be done." Poirot felt a stir of revelation, but also of doubt. Laurent was hot-tempered and desperate, yes, but poison required calculation. And Laurent Delacroix hardly struck him as a man of patience. Still, the threat mattered. Renault rubbed his temples. "What do you think, Poirot? Motive means he had both." "The motive? Oui," Poirot murmured. "But the mind? That is what I question. Laurent acts with passion, not with precision. And this crime, it required a calm heart and a cool head." He tapped the letter lightly. "No, Inspector, this is too crude for our murderer." Later, Poirot made his way to the cellars, Bernard's sanctuary and pride. The barrels stood like silent sentinels, rows upon rows stretching into dimness. The air smelled faintly of oak and crushed berries. Here, under the weight of centuries of Vintner's work, Poirot felt something stirring in his intuition. The cellar held answers. He approached the workbench, where tools and bottles lay organized with Bernard's meticulous care. But something was off. Poirot paused, then knelt, scanning the floor. A faint scratch mark, barely noticeable, marred the stone tiles. A heavy object had been dragged recently. Following the marks, he discovered an irregularity, one wine barrel slightly misaligned from the rest. With a firm push, Poirot rolled it aside, revealing a small compartment built into the wall, a smuggler's hideaway from the 1800s. Empty now. Poirot's thin eyebrows lifted. "Ah," he whispered, "our murderer hides more than poison." Just then, footsteps echoed behind him. He turned to find Camille Moreau standing at the foot of the cellar stairs, her face pale, but her gaze steady. "Monsieur Poirot, you should not be down here alone," she said softly. "Ah, Mademoiselle Moreau," Poirot replied, studying her with keen attention. "A curious place for you to be tonight." "I came to fetch a bottle for Madame Delacroix," she said quickly. though the tremor in her voice betrayed unease. She cannot sleep." "And you, mademoiselle?" Poirot asked gently. "Can you?" Camille hesitated. "Not really. This house feels haunted lately." Poirot noted the defensiveness in her posture, the quickness of her breath. Camille had secrets that made her fragile. But were they deadly? He stepped away from the hidden compartment, covering it casually with his body. "Tell me, Camille, why did Bernard dismiss you from your position last month?" Her eyes widened. "How did you— I wasn't dismissed. I chose to leave." "Non," Poirot said softly. "You were dismissed. Bernard's letters to his solicitor confirm it." Tears brimmed, but her voice sharpened. He didn't trust me anymore. He thought I was spying on him, but I wasn't. I came back today because Madame asked me to. I had nowhere else to go." Poirot held her gaze. It was agonized, yes, but sincere. He drew no conclusion yet, but marked her distress in the ledger of his mind. When Camille left, Poirot waited until her steps disappeared up the staircase. Then he carefully opened the hidden compartment again, and found something wedged deep inside. A torn edge of fabric. Burgundy silk, women's silk. Poirot's breath caught. "So," he murmured, "a lady of elegance has been in this cellar, and recently." He placed the scrap in an envelope and exited quietly. Later that night, Poirot sought out Madame Isabelle Delacroix. He found her in the piano room, a haunting melody drifting from her fingers. The moon cast an ethereal glow across her face, softening the edges of her grief, or perhaps intensifying its mysteries. "Madame," Poirot said gently. She stopped playing. "Monsieur Poirot, I assume you have questions." "Oui, many." Poirot looked at her gown. Silver grey, elegant, but not silk. "Tell me, madame, where is your burgundy evening dress? The one you wore 2 nights before your husband's death." Her eyes flickered. "That dress is old. I discarded it." "Burned?" Poirot asked quietly. She stiffened. "Is that an accusation?" "Only an observation," Poirot replied. "You see, I found a piece of burgundy silk in a hidden cellar compartment. A dress torn on stone. A dress worn by someone who had reason to visit Bernard's secret space." Isabelle's breath trembled. "You know nothing, Poirot." "On the contrary," he said softly, "I know enough to fear for your safety and your truth." Isabelle's eyes glistened. "You must let this rest." Poirot stepped closer. "Madame, someone killed your husband. Someone who walks these halls even now." For a moment, she seemed ready to speak, ready to spill a truth she had carried too long. But then, footsteps sounded outside the piano room. Heavy, slow, and deliberate. Isabelle froze. Poirot turned sharply toward the doorway. A figure paused in the shadows, unseen, watching, and then disappeared. Poirot felt a chill whisper through him. Someone had been listening. More importantly, someone was afraid. And fear, Poirot knew, was the murderer's closest companion. Chapter 9. The Unravelling of Lies. The dawn crept slowly over Château Vermeil, its pale light glinting on the dew-laden vines. Hercule Poirot walked the gravel paths alone, the air crisp with autumn chill. The events of the past nights weighed heavily upon him. The cellar discoveries, the poisoned bottle, the hidden compartments, the burgundy silk, Camille's trembling confession. Each thread tugged at a complex tapestry of deceit and fear. Yet the final knot remained concealed, waiting to be untangled. Poirot's little grey cells worked furiously, assembling evidence, motives, and opportunities like ingredients in a complex vintage. Soon he knew the truth would reveal itself. Inside the chateau, the household moved cautiously. The servants whispered, watching each other with eyes wide, suspicion festering in every glance. Juliet sat by the breakfast table, pale and silent, her hands clutching a cup of coffee as though it might anchor her to reality. Hercule Poirot entered quietly, his presence measured, deliberate. "Mademoiselle," he said softly, "may I speak with you?" Juliet looked up, startled but compliant, following him into the library. Poirot gestured for her to sit. "You saw much, n'est-ce pas, last night?" Juliet nodded, voice trembling. I heard movements upstairs, someone sneaking past Camille's room. I thought it was Victor Marceau returning, but it was too silent, too careful." Poirot's gaze sharpened. "And you saw no face?" She shook her head. "Only a shadow, but it wore gloves." The detail struck Poirot. Gloves. The murderer was cautious, deliberate, a person accustomed to hiding traces, masking intent, and yet something in the silk in the cellar suggested feminine hands. Poirot scribbled notes silently, his mind arranging possibilities. Victor Marceau had motive, yes, but a man's hands rarely leave a torn burgundy scrap in a darkened room. Could someone have used the rivalry to mislead the investigation? Poirot next sought Camille in her quarters. The young woman was pale but resolute. Seated by her writing desk, a notebook open before her. "Monsieur Poirot," she whispered, I cannot lie. There is more I have kept." Her eyes flickered toward a small drawer, from which she retrieved a bundle of letters and a vial wrapped in silk. "Laurent gave me these months ago. He feared someone in the household. He said they might try to harm him, but he never said who." Poirot took the items with careful fingers, inspecting the vial. The faint metallic scent confirmed his suspicions. The poison had been handled here before. Camille's voice shook. "I never touched the bottle myself. I kept it safe, as he instructed. But last night, when I returned, it was gone." Poirot nodded. "And you did not see who removed it?" She shook her head. "No, only shadows, whispers of movement." Armed with new clarity, Poirot gathered the family in the grand salon by late afternoon. Isabelle, Juliet, Camille, and even Henri assembled, tense, each aware that the net of truth was closing. Poirot cleared his throat and spoke, deliberate, calm. "Mesdames et messieurs, the time has come to speak plainly. The truth is hidden not in anger nor rivalry, but in deceit cultivated within these walls. Each of you has secrets, yes, but only one had the means, knowledge, and opportunity to commit murder in cold calculation." He paused, letting his words settle like sediment. "First, let us review facts. Bernard Delacroix, poisoned slowly, struggled before succumbing. The poison required knowledge of herbs, careful handling, and access to his private tasting room. Someone left evidence: burgundy silk, misaligned barrels, open vials, intending to mislead us. And someone observed Camille in the conservatory, intending to frame her." Isabelle's hands trembled on the table. Juliet's eyes widened, and Camille's lips parted in anticipation. Poirot continued. "We have three main candidates: Victor Marceau, the rival, Émile Delacroix, the disinherited brother, and one among you within the household. Victor had motive, yes, but he was accounted for, with witnesses and alibis. Émile had financial pressures, but he lacked access to the private cellar and the confidence to poison Bernard without detection." He let the silence stretch. Then, with a delicate flourish, he lifted the burgundy silk. "This scrap reveals the culprit. A woman familiar with the household, with both opportunity and the knowledge to manipulate the poison without arousing suspicion. She sought to appear frightened, to guide suspicion toward others while quietly executing her plan." All eyes fixed on Poirot. Isabelle's lips parted, then pressed together. Juliet shivered. Camille's fingers tightened around the edge of her chair. Poirot took a slow step forward. The person who entered the cellar, handled the poison, and left the silk is you, Madame Isabelle. Isabelle froze, her face pale as moonlight. Me? Impossible, she whispered. I loved Bernard. I could never— Poirot's gaze was steady. Love, madame, can ferment into dangerous passions. Bernard had threatened to leave a significant portion of the estate to Juliet. You feared humiliation, exposure, and loss of control. You knew of the private tasting room, the poison stored there, and the perfect opportunity to act when Bernard was alone. You staged the head injury to mislead authorities, left evidence to implicate Camille, and relied upon the rivalry with Victor to distract investigation. Her hands flew to her mouth. I did not mean to. It was supposed to be subtle, only to frighten him. Poirot nodded slightly. Yes, but fear and poison are a treacherous blend. And now the harvest moon sees the truth. Death comes not from accidents alone, but from the careful planning of those closest to us. She sank into the chair, broken, as Renault moved forward to restrain her. Camille stepped back, tears streaming, relief and horror mingling on her face. Juliet's hands flew to her mouth, silent shock resonating through the room. Poirot stood, expression calm, surveying the tableau. The little grey cells have spoken, he murmured softly. The shadows that lurked beneath the vines have been brought into light, and the web of deceit, carefully cultivated, has finally unravelled. Outside, the wind carried the faint scent of grapes, ripening and ready for harvest. The vineyard remained tranquil, yet beneath the calm, the echoes of human passion, envy, and greed lingered, whispering lessons about the cost of secrets and the sharpness of carefully laid plans. Chapter 10. The Vintner's Vengeance Revealed. The morning after Isabelle Delacroix's confession, Château Vermeil was eerily quiet. The autumn sun filtered through the high windows, casting elongated shadows across the polished floors. Shadows that seemed to echo the ghosts of the past week. Hercule Poirot stood in the great hall, observing the household as they moved cautiously, their eyes lowered, their steps tentative. The air was heavy with the scent of damp leaves and crushed grapes from the vineyards outside. Yet beneath it lingered the subtle undertone of human treachery. A perfume Poirot had learned to detect with unmatched precision. Today, the final threads of the mystery would be drawn tight, and the truth fully revealed. Poirot called for a private gathering in the drawing-room. Present were Juliet, Camille, Henri, and the household staff, all seated in subdued anticipation. Isabelle remained in the adjacent room, detained but calm, aware that the little grey cells of the great detective had uncovered her culpability. Poirot began not with accusation, but with reflection. His voice, calm and deliberate. Mesdames et messieurs, the events of the past days have brought grief and uncertainty. Yet, as always, justice is a vine that thrives best when nurtured by observation, patience, and reason. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. He recounted the sequence of discoveries meticulously, the misaligned barrel in the cellar, the hidden compartment, the burgundy silk, Camille's frightened presence in the conservatory, the poison vial, and the falsified injuries that had attempted to mislead investigators. Each piece, in isolation, is ambiguous, Poirot explained, but when woven together, they form a tapestry that reveals intention, opportunity, and motive. The assembly listened intently, their expressions a mixture of apprehension and awe. Poirot's gaze shifted to Henri. You were a loyal caretaker, observing diligently, Yet unaware of the deepest machinations within the household, your testimony regarding the cellar's disturbance was invaluable. Henri inclined his head, his relief almost tangible. "Thank you, Monsieur Poirot," he murmured. Turning to Camille, Poirot's voice softened. "Mademoiselle Moreau, you acted with honesty and courage. Though your presence and the possession of the herbal vials were manipulated by the perpetrator, your intentions remained pure. Your fear was real, yet unfounded in guilt." Camille exhaled shakily, a measure of relief flooding her features. Poirot then addressed Juliet, and you, mademoiselle, observed keenly. Your awareness of movements and shadows provided crucial insight. Often, those who watch without interfering reveal the truest perspective. Juliet nodded, her pale hands clenching and unclenching as she absorbed the praise. Finally, Poirot's gaze turned toward the doorway where Isabelle had been confined. With a measured step, he gestured for her to enter, her posture rigid yet composed. She obeyed, knowing that the truth would now be set bare. Poirot's voice took on a solemn timbre. "Madame Delacroix, you orchestrated this tragedy. Your fears of financial loss, humiliation and exposure drove you to act against your husband. You administered poison in the guise of care, staged an injury to mislead, and planted evidence to implicate others. The burgundy silk, the hidden vial, and the cellar disturbances all point unerringly to your hand." Isabelle's eyes widened, the veneer of composure cracking. I only wished to protect our estate, to prevent scandal. I loved him. I did not intend," her voice faltered, a mixture of desperation and guilt spilling out. Poirot's expression remained calm, almost gentle. "Love, madame, can ferment into the most dangerous of vintages. Your affection, entangled with fear and ambition, produced a bitterness lethal enough to claim a life. Justice is not revenge, it is clarity. And now, clarity has been achieved." The room remained silent, heavy with the weight of truth. Outside, the vineyard stretched in neat rows, golden under the rising sun. Yet beneath the beauty lay a reminder. Human passions are as potent as the finest wine, capable of intoxicating and destroying in equal measure. Poirot continued, turning to the assembled household. "The investigation also reveals a cautionary lesson. Suspicion can be misdirected, evidence can be manipulated, and appearances can deceive. Yet reason, observation, and deduction will always illuminate what shadows seek to obscure. In this case, the murderer was neither the obvious rival nor the disinherited brother, but one whose proximity to the victim enabled her calculated actions." He paused to allow the meaning to settle. Juliet's eyes glistened, Camille's lips trembled, and Henri's posture softened, a collective exhalation passing among them. Even Isabelle lowered her head, accepting the inevitability of her guilt. Poirot then instructed Renaud to take Isabelle into custody, ensuring her safety while beginning the legal proceedings. "Madame," he said softly, "you will answer for your actions, but may also find an opportunity for reflection and atonement. Though the outcome is tragic, the truth remains. It is the light that reveals, not vengeance." With the immediate danger resolved, Poirot turned his attention to the estate itself. The vineyards awaited harvest, the barrels demanded attention, and the legacy of the Delacroix family remained, marred by loss, but preserved by reason. The detective walked slowly through the corridors, noting small details, the photographs on the walls, the careful organization of tools, the evidence of a life once orderly, now unsettled. Each observation was a reminder of the human complexity he so loved to decipher. Before departing, Poirot met privately with Renaud. "Inspector, ensure the evidence is documented thoroughly. the lesson must extend beyond the walls of Château Vermeil. Human passion, ambition, and fear, when combined, are as potent as any poison. But reason will endure. Renaud nodded, impressed yet humbled by the depth of Poirot's insight. As the morning deepened into noon, Poirot stepped onto the terrace one final time, gazing at the vineyards stretching endlessly toward the horizon. The sun illuminated the rows of ripening grapes, glinting like liquid gold. And the chateau, though scarred by tragedy, stood resolute. Poirot's small smile appeared. Gentle but knowing, the case was closed, yet the lessons lingered. Deception is seductive, motives are manifold, and truth, like the finest wine, requires patience, discernment, and careful tasting. And with that, Hercule Poirot turned and walked slowly down the gravel path, leaving Château Vermeil behind, its shadows revealed and its secrets laid bare, ready for the next chapter in the endless human drama of passion, ambition, and reason.